John Gill, Exposition of the entire Bible, Revelations chapter 6, verse 5, being read by Peter John. Scripture quote, "And when he had opened the third seal," unquote. John Gill quote, "of the sealed book," unquote. Scripture quote, "I heard the third beast say, 'Come and see,'" unquote. John Gill quote, "This living creature was that which was like a man, who was on the south side of the throne, as the standard of Reuben, which had the figure of a man, was on the south side of the camp of Israel. This was not the Apostle Paul, as Grotius thinks, to whom was made a prophecy of a famine in the days of Claudius Caesar, nor Tertullian, who made an apology for the Christians in the times of the seal, as Brightman conjectures, but the ministers of the gospel, whose voice was neither the voice of the lion nor of the ox, but of a man, which was still lower. But yet they retained their humility, reasoning, prudency, and wisdom. And these are represented as calling upon John to come and see, and take notice of the following hieroglyphics," unquote. Scripture quote, "And I beheld, and lo, a black horse," unquote. John Gill quote, "An emblem either of the afflicted state of the church, still answering to the Smyrnans one," it's SMYRNAEAN, "being black with persecutions, schemes, errors, and heresies, which were many, or particularly of the heresies and heretics of those times, who might be compared to a horse for their pride and ambition, speaking great swelling words of vanity, and to a black one for their hidden things of dishonesty and works of darkness, for the darkness in themselves in which they spread over others, or rather of a famine, not in a spiritual sense of hearing of the word, but in a literal sense." See Lamentations chapter 4, verse 7. Reading from the King James Bible, quote, "Her Nazarenes were purer than snow. They were whiter than milk. They were more ruddy in body than rubies. Their polishing was of sapphire," unquote. Not what was at the siege of Jerusalem or in the times of Claudius Caesar. See Acts chapter 11, verse 28. Reading from the King James Bible, quote, "And there stood up one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit that there should be great dearth throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar," unquote. But in the times of the Emperor Severus, that's Severus, and others, as the historians of those times and the writings of Tertullian show, that the heathens ascribed the scarcity that was among them to the wickedness of the Christians, whereas it was a judgment upon them for their persecution of them," unquote. Scripture quote, "And he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand," unquote. John Gill quote, "By whom is meant not some noted heretic or heretics, who had balances of deceit in their hand to prove their tenets by, such as spurious writings, etc., or who made pretensions to the Scriptures, the balance of the sanctuary toward doctrines in nor Christ, whose name heretics shrouded themselves under and professed, and who overruled and made use of their heresies for the good of his people, that they might be made manifest. Mr. Meade, that's Mede, thinks that Septimus, that's Septimius, Severus, Severus, the Roman emperor, who came from Africa, from the south, on which side was the living creature that spoke to John, is intended, and in which country black horses were in great esteem, and he was the only African that ever was emperor of Rome before, and the same author thinks that his having a pair of balances in his hand expresses the strict justice that emperor was famous for, but rather it signifies famine and such a scarcity as that bread is delivered out by weight to men. See Leviticus chapter 26, verse 26. Scripture quote, "And when I have broken the staff of your bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven, and they shall deliver you your bread again by weight, and ye shall eat and not be satisfied." Unquote. End of John Gill's Revelation chapter 6, verse 5.